Assalamu alaikum, everyone. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Condolences to all of you on the Shahadat of our sixth Imam Jaffer Sadiq alayhi salam. May Allah grant us the tawfiq and the access to perform his ziyarat, inshallah. Also, so for our program for tonight, inshallah, we'll start with Surah Yasin, recited by Abbas Ali Fazal, specifically for the Isal Sawab of Al-Hajj Marhum Firoz Merchant, followed by Marshia, followed by Majlis, Matam, and inshallah concluded Ziyarat. So we'll get started with Surah Yasin. Abbas Ali, give me 1 second and we'll get started, inshallah. Okay, Bismillah, Abbas Ali.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون والسواء عليهم أنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم فإن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب عليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسأل قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي الضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآيات لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآيات لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالأرجون القديم لا شمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآيات لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشاء نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولهم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله وتمه إن أنتم إلا في الضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في السور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مركزنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في الظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا يوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم أن لا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لتمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فعنا يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نعمره ننكس في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إن نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال ما يحيي العظام وهي الرميم قل يحيي الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل
على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرج.
Thank you, Abbas Ali. Surah Mubarak al-Fatiha.
So
Bismillah.
بل محمد وآل محمد صلوات
اللهم صل على محمد
محمد وآل محمد. ہو گئے بازو قلم مشق بنا بچائی نہ گئی. ہو گئے بازو قلم مشق بچائی نہ گئی. پیاس سرکار سے سکینہ کی بجھائی نہ گئی. ہو گئے بازو قلم مشق بچائی نہ گئی. جانے کیا کہہ گئے بائیں سے علمدار جری. جانے کیا کہہ گئے بائیں سے علمدار جری. لاش عباس کے سرور سے اٹھائے نہ گئی. لاش اندھیرے میں سکینہ کی تھی محتاج کفن. لاش اندھیرے میں سکینہ کی تھی محتاج کفن. شمع تک شام کے زندان میں جلائی نہ گئی. کربلا سے ہے بہت دور سکینہ کا مزار. کربلا سے ہے بہت دور سکینہ کا مزار. آج تک باپ سے بیٹی کی جدائی نہ گئی. لاش اکبر پہ یہ لیلا نے کہا رو رو کر. لاش اکبر پہ یہ لیلا نے کہا رو رو کر. ہائے قسمت تیری شادی بھی رچائی نہ گئی. بازوئے شاہ میں ایک تیر تھا ہاتھ اٹھ نہ سکے. بازوئے شاہ میں ایک تیر تھا ہاتھ اٹھ نہ سکے. لاش اصغر کی کلیجے سے لگائی نہ گئی. رک گیا تیرا قلم ہاتھوں تک آتی وقار. رک گیا تیرا قلم ہاتھوں تک آتی وقار. مجھ سے عباس کی تصویر बनाए ना गए, हो गए बाजो कलम मश्क बचाए ना गए। अलानतुल्लाह अलकौम ज़ालिमीन व सयअलमुल्लज़ीना ज़लमू अय्य मुनक़लबिन यनक़लिबून इन्ना लिल्लाहि व इन्ना इलैहि राजिऊन। रहिमल्लाहु मन क़रा सूरतु मुबारकतिल फ़ातिहा। बिस्मिल्लाह।
صلوا على محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله بارئ الخلائق الأجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء حبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد. ثم الصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، سيما ولي الله الحجة ابن الحسن صاحب الأمر والزمان. روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وكونوا مع الصادقين. صدق الله العلي العظيم وآمنا به. نوروا مجالسكم بذكر محمد وآل محمد. أحبائي, in honor of Maulana Imam Jaffer ibn Muhammad Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, the idea today is to examine some of the challenges that faced the Imam as he conducted this divinely appointed position and role of Imamah. And you find that the time of Imam al-Sadiq was such that the entire Islamic Ummah was filled with multiple ideological beliefs and systems that all competed to provide an answer in regards to what the true existence of God entails and what the reality of religion is. Yani during the time of Imam al-Sadiq, there was an influx, multiple theories and ideologies that existed in order to answer these fundamental questions. What is the reality of religion and what is the reality of the existence of God? And the goal of tonight's lecture is to show you that some of the challenges that Imam al-Sadiq faced during his time are similar to the challenges that we face in this day and age. And similarly, just like the solutions in that time laid with Imam al-Sadiq, even the solutions to the challenges that we face in this day and age lie with Imam al-Sadiq. I realize that our time is very short, and therefore we will cut down on the introduction and move into the core of the Bahath. Historians mention that Mufaddal ibn Umar, who was one of the revered companions of our sixth Imam, he states that one day I was sitting in Masjidun Nabawi, in the Haram of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. And as I sat between the qabr of the Holy Prophet and the mimbar, and you know that the area between the qabr and the mimbar of Rasulullah is known as the Rawdah, one of the gardens of Jannah. It says, as I was sitting there contemplating about the greatness and the divinity associated with Rasulullah, this grand maqam, this grand position which Allah Azza wa Jalla has given to Rasulullah, as I was in this place, Mubarak, in a state of tafakkur, he says, I saw a person by the name of Ibn Abil Hawja come into the mosque with a number of his companions. Ibn Abil Hawja, together with his companions, they sat at a distance close to me. And as they sat down and they had a discussion, I was able to listen because of the proximity with which they were sitting towards me. As the discussion went forward, Ibn Abil Hawja began to talk about the reality of creation and the reality of the existence of God. So the hadith, narrated by Mufaddal ibn Umar, he goes on to say, فَذَكَرَ مِنْ ibn Abil Hawja فَذَكَرَ ابْتِدَاءَ الْأَشْيَاءِ فزعم أن ذلك بإحمال لا صنعة فيه ولا تدبير فيه ولا صانع ولا مدبر بل الأشياء تتكون بذاتها بلا مدبر فالدنيا كانت لم تزل ولا تزال. Ibn Abil Hawja, who is seen as a prominent thinker, as you will see, he sits with his companions, and as they're having a discussion on theology, what we would call usuluddin, Mufaddal ibn Umar says Ibn Abil Hawja began to tell his companions that this world does not have a creator. It was not created by what we would call a master architect. Rather, everything within nature came into existence on its own, in that nature is empowered to bring about within itself existence and growth without the necessity of any external power. He goes on to say there was no Lord, there was no creator. Rather, this nature developed itself. Mufaddal ibn Umar stood up in anger, he left, and in short, it was this conversation, because of this conversation, that Mufaddal ibn Umar went to Imam Sadiq and asked him for guidance on how to reply to atheistic arguments such as these. And it is from here that Imam Sadiq asked Mufaddal ibn Umar to transcribe everything, and this is the beginning of how the book Tawheed al-Mufaddal was written. Tawheed al-Mufaddal, lessons in Tawheed, understanding the existence of Allah and the wisdom and the qudra of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the creation. Having said this, our kalam is not in the book Tawheed al-Mufaddal. Our kalam today is understanding this mentality and this concept of Ibn Abil Hawja. Tayyib. Person comes to Masjid al-Nabawi with this concept. Inta Habibi, what do you categorize this person? Do you call him Muslim? Do you call him Mu'min? Do you call him Mushrik? Do you call him Kafir? What do you call him? Kafir. No. Is there any doubt in this? He cannot be a mu'min, doesn't believe in Allah, can't be Muslim. Mu'min is a particularity of a Muslim, a higher daraja. He cannot be a mushrik because mushrik believes in multiple deities, multiple lords. So the remaining option is what? Kafir. Don't be scared. Kafir. Doesn't believe in any Allah. Kafir. Now I come and I ask you, Ya Habibi, Kafir, who rejects the existence of Allah, this argument that he comes up with is an argument that denotes ignorance and jahal, or does it denote ilm and intellect? Jahal. Ahsantum. It indicates jahal. You and I sitting here many years later, we are able to evaluate the thoughts of Ibn Abil Hawja as being a jahil, ignorant person who failed to comprehend the very basics of the existence of Allah, fundamental concept on earth. Sahih Allah. Sahih. You find that during the time of Imam Sadiq, the story was totally different. Ibn Abil Hawja was perceived. He perceived himself. And amongst his followers, he was perceived as a free thinker who, through his intellectual arguments, was able to liberate the minds of the people from the shackles of religion. Ibn Abil Hawja, where did he come with this argument that the earth or nature creates in itself? Sometimes when we come across ideas and concepts of misguidance, it becomes our fundamental role, our fundamental duty to research the origin of these ideologies, Where did Ibn Abil Hawja come with such an ideology? What influenced him? Was this ideology a product of his intellectual deduction of premises that made him lead towards a certain conclusion? Ibn Abil Hawja, who comes with this argument, who you and I today call him very clean and clear, Jahil atheist, ya akhi, he was simply echoing a greater philosophical concept embedded within metaphysical naturalism. Allahu Akbar. And now we thought this guy is that mjinga of the Barabara who is coming and negating Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. La ya akhi. People had studied. Ibn Abil Hawja had even studied this concept within philosophical naturalism. Is a philosophical concept that goes on to say that nature is governed by nature. Nature came into existence through nature, and it negates the existence of any supernatural spiritual being. Tayyib. Where did this philosophical theory come from, which Ibn Abil Hawja is echoing in Masjid al-Nabawi, which you and I accept as being an atheistic form of belief? This belief emanates from a pre-Socratic philosopher by the name of Thales. Thales was a known astronomer, mathematician, and philosopher who lived close to 500 BC, 500 years before the birth of Nabi Isa. Yani, our point over here is that the likes of Ibn Abil Hawja, they came up with certain understandings of religion, certain understandings of haq and batil by coming and taking their teachings from pre-Socratic philosophers, in essence, who preached atheism. You and I think that atheism or kufr or shirk is propagated by people who have no culture, who have no manner of talking, speaking, those takatakas of the streets. La ya akhi! Thales was seen as one of the greatest aristocrats. In fact, in his biography, and the greatest thinkers of his time, in his biography, it is established that Thales, who came up with this theory of metaphysical naturalism or philosophical naturalism, in his biography, it is stated that his belief system was influenced by ancient Egyptian belief. Yani, this one person, Thales, who the world reveres as a philosopher, dating pre-Socrates, he is the same group of intellectual people, thinkers, that were the first line of enemies towards the message of the Anbiya. 500 BC, yani before the time of Nabi Isa. Who are those people who fought against Nabi Yahya and Nabi Zakaria when it came to establishing the message of Tawheed? It wasn't only those ignorant people of the community who you and I call ignorant, but it was those people who were labeled as the intellectuals of their society who fought against the Anbiya. Thales took his teaching from where? In his biography it says from ancient Egyptian theology. Nabi Musa came to destroy this ancient Egyptian theology or to establish it. Al-mushkila ya ikhwani, when people begin to take their theology from what they may consider or what the world may consider as philosophical thinkers and the establishment of civilization and progression. But when you look into their root ideology, kufr in its entirety, who you take your religion from, your values of what's right and what's wrong, ya akhi, is absolutely important. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Look at the influence of Greek mythology. Sarahatan, it's mythology. When you come out as a thinker with the conclusion that there is no creator for this universe, is nothing more than a myth. You find that the influence of Greek mythology or atheistic philosophy that crept into the Muslim Ummah under an orchestrated movement through Bani Abbas to weaken the reality of Islam. And you find that these challenges that Imam Sadiq faced during his time, these challenges are present in this day and age or not? You look at one of the greatest challenges in this day and age. We have a group or a school of thought from within the Shia who call themselves Shia. La alayna wal akharin. We have nothing to do with the others. Group of thinkers from within our school of thought who come forward and propose the idea of relativity in the interpretation of religious texts. Nisbiyatul ma'rifah and nisbiyatul ilm. In Arabic, this is what is translated. Yani what? Relativity of the interpretation of text and relativity of the interpretation of religion. The school of thought comes forward and says that, ya akhi, everything within the religion, and these are all summarized in layman language so that all of us can understand. The ilm is not making a simple object or a simple concept seem complicated or complex. No, bal'aks. Ilm is the opposite, where you can take something complex and break it down into something simple and digestible. And mushkilatna, even in this day and age, we have changed the scales of knowledge to be the opposite. The more and more somebody speaks about complex rubbish that nobody could understand, alim, you provide for them something simple, everything could digest. Mushkil. Why? Because we take our scales of intellectualism and ilm from other than those who are supposed to be taken from. In any case, concept of relativity, the relativity of the interpretation of religious texts. The notion behind this is that everything within the Sharia, and the keyword over here is everything within the Sharia, and everything within the Hadith, everything we understand from the Quran, its interpretation is subject to change due to the time and space. This is the concept of relativity of understanding or interpreting religious texts. Nisbiyat al-ma'rifah, nisbiyat al-ilm. Hence, based on this underlining principle, everything within the Sharia is subject to change. And the element or the driving factor that allows the change of interpretation is the time in which you live. Therefore, based on this, you come and you find that a lot of the interpretations of the Quran are cancelled, or a lot of the interpretation of the Quran is discarded because it is not relevant to us in the 21st century. Have you heard this argument, Lola? They used this theory to come and tell you, Ya Habibi, hijab, ya hijab. The hijab which is mentioned within our hadith was for 1400 years ago during the time of Rasulullah. The definition of hijab now is different. Why is it different? Because the zamana is different. And so now Allah has given us an intellect to deduce a new understanding of hijab in the 21st century, as opposed to the understanding of hijab that is given to us by Rasulullah and the Amir and Sayyidat Nisa'il Alameen. But more to this, they come and they tell you, under this theory of relativity of interpretation of the text, everything within the Sharia is subject to change. And so now, personal encounter. Under this theory, they come and they tell us that even the manner in which you recite salat is subject to change. Does not necessarily mean the way Rasulullah recited salat is the same way you should recite salat today. They came forward and they even came and they told us, under this rule of relativity, this inheritance, proportion of inheritance, yes, that the man gets double the portion of the woman in inheritance. This was for that zamana, when the women were not working. In the 21st century, these rules are not applicable to you. Why? Because even the women work just like the way men work. Understand the basis of this theory. This concept, relativity of the interpretation of religious texts, they advertise it as being a doorway to opening a new understanding of religion, which is compatible with the times. Now, between brackets, Bainal Qawsain, our time is almost run out. We'll try and continue this some other time. Bainal Qawsain, so that the kalam is not hanging. In regards to inheritance for the man and the woman, when the Rasulullah comes forward within the Sharia, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala establishes that inheritance for the man is double the portion of the woman. Does this mean that Allah values the man more than the woman? Does this mean that the man has more rights than the woman? Does this mean that man dominates over woman and woman has no rights and is madloom and shouldn't work? Ya Babe, what does the rule of inheritance have to do with women working? Aslan. Women can work, bila shak. Allah has given them the freedom. The rule for inheritance, the man's portion being twice to that of the woman, was on the basis that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained financial obligation, the responsibility of financial obligations, this responsibility of taking care of the finances. Allah has made it wajib on the man and not on the woman. This is it. Now, if the day and the age in which we work and the society and the culture in which we work forces a woman to also contribute towards the houses and to take up financial responsibility, then where is the fault of the religion? In order to accommodate for atheistic values, now we want to change the Sharia. Ya akhi, underlining root, this concept, relativity of interpretation of Islamic text. Under this rule, they came and they even threw out Azadari. No, because Azadari gives us a bad image. It gives us the image of backward people. Had we been living 500-600 years ago in a culture where everybody was doing math, then it should be fine. But because now we are in a suited, booted environment, it doesn't work. Interpretation of the religion as per the times in which you go. Ya akhi, is this concept established within Islam? Where are the roots of this concept? I tell you the roots of this concept. Relativity of interpretation of Islamic text or religious texts emanates from, again, a pre-Christ philosopher by the name of Protagoras. Protagoras comes forward with the theory that there is no absolute truth truth as a concept is not something absolute. Rather, truth is relative in that what you perceive through your mind is considered to be truth, and what I perceive in my mind is considered as truth. There is no absolute concrete truth out there. Based on this, you have a pluralistic system that is built where people come forward, and I have heard this in interfaith and from our own people. They come and they religion, whichever religion you are, yeah, these are like different streams that are all leading back to the same God. You have heard this argument? No. I'm living in a different dunya. The root comes from where? From this philosopher known as Protagoras, who comes with this concept that there does not exist any absolute truth. And because there is no absolute truth, interpretation of religious text is relative. What does Islam have to say about this? In essence, when you come forward, dalil akli, when you come and say there is no absolute truth, and whatever everybody deduces, composes of truth, that means this clear black and white line of haqq and batil is eradicated in its entirety based on this notion or on the underlying principle of relativity of the interpretation of religious text or relativity of truth. That means, wal-ayadu billah, Nabi Musa was correct and Fir'aun was also correct. Why? Because truth was relative. Nabi Musa perceived it as one thing, Fir'aun perceived it as one thing. This means Rasulullah was also correct. Wal-ayadu billah, Abu Sufyan was also correct. Because Rasulullah's understanding of truth was relative and Abu Sufyan's understanding was relative. Wal-ayadu billah, it means Imam al-Hussein was correct and Yazid was also correct. Why? Because there is nothing like the absolute truth. The influence of Greek mythology, atheistic Greek mythology that corrupted the religion during the time of Imam Sadiq, is a leading cause for the fasad and the fitna that we face today. But even more, where religious text is understood through the teachings of atheistic philosophers. We have nothing against philosophy. Philosophy is a man-made science. There are things that are right, there are things that are wrong. Not everything that you learn from the University of Albert and Mackenzie and Julie and Fulan is correct, ya akhi. Imam is the scale of haqq. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala within the Quran says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, ittaqullaha wa kunu ma'as sadiqeen. Who are these sadiqeen? Ulama of the Amma as well as the Khassa from the Amma, non-Shia, the likes of Abi Yusuf ibn Sufyan in his tafsir in regards to this verse. He narrates a narration, he puts forward the narration which is narrated by Malik ibn Anas on authority of Nafi, on authority of Ibn Umar, when he was asked about this question, who are the Sadiqin? He said, Muhammad wa ahlu baytih. We come to interpret religious texts by depending on premises built by atheistic individuals. Ya Gabawa. This comes under the notion of what? Comes under the notion of what? Intellectualism. Intellectualism, bil haq. You come and you interpret a religion of truth based on atheistic principles. Where is the ilm in this? That's jahal in the libas of ilm. No, we run behind these because they've got big titles behind them. The challenges that we face today. Ya ikhwani, how do you celebrate a marriage? Quran tells us, Kunu ma'as sadiqeen. Be with the Ahlul Bayt. Be with the Ahlul Bayt. Every blink of an eye, every breath of your life, every decision you make, your first point of reference is Ahlul Bayt. What did Sadiq say? What did Baqir say? What did Kazim say? What did Rida say? When it comes to deciding on how a marriage should be celebrated, I don't look at Fulan and Fulan. I come back and I see what did Imam al-Sadiq say. When it comes to selecting a spouse, I come back and say, what did Imam al-Sadiq say? When it comes to engaging in a trade, whether it is halal and haram, ethical, not ethical, come back to what Imam al-Sadiq said. Principles of leadership. I go and find principles of leadership from Fulan and Fulan. What shortcoming is there in the principles of leadership given to me by Amir al-Mu'mineen? But no, we want to find answers from the rest of the dunya. And wallahi, custom on the member of Ahlul Bayt, we ourselves daraw Ahlul Bayt. And we daraw the people who stand up for Ahlul Bayt. No concepts like these and those who propagate concepts like these are labeled as traditionalists. Yalla, find answers from other than traditionalists for the problems that we face within our ummah. Ya akhi, we have a certain problem within our community, a certain problem within our family. I want to understand, is this problem nature or is this problem nurture? I will look for answers from Freud. I will look for answers from Julie. I will look for answers from the Sambusa wala. I will look for answers from everybody. But I will not look an answer from Imam Sadiq. What did Sadiq say about this issue? How did Sadiq say we deal with this issue? Our problem is the karitha, the disasters that we face socially and ideologically is because we chose everybody and left behind a Sadiq. This is the reality of the matter, whether we feel bad about it or whatever we do. But this is the reality, Ikhwani. When do we wake up? These same ideologies that we run behind, that prove themselves or that are labeled by the society as being intellectualists or intellectuals, the root is the root of kufr. But you know when was our first downfall? When we were convinced by them that our practices are backward. Because we accepted this from them. And we ourselves condemned those who abide by Ahlul Bayt. And then resorted to them to try and bring in reformation. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. There is much to say. The time is over. Tonight is the day, or today is the day for Imam Sadiq. And you find that, just like the way Imam Sadiq is madloom today, in that his teachings are shunned, Imam Sadiq was madloom even then. Not only was his teachings shunned, but physical violence advocated against him for the principles and for the truth that he stood up for. Historians mention that Imam Sadiq, there was an attempt on his life, attempted assassinations on his life 5 times prior to the last time that he was poisoned. 5 times they tried to poison Imam Sadiq. And one of the days, one of the nights, they come and on the order of Mansur Dawaniki, they lit the house of Imam Sadiq on fire while he and his entire family are sleeping inside. And then we have seen when there is a fire that comes or a fire engulfs a building. Shaifin, what happened in Grenfell? And the fire races through the house. Ikhwani, fire is such a thing. A person who is on the 25th floor, he would rather jump down and die rather than be burnt alive. Imam Sadiq's house was lit on fire. Imam Sadiq runs out and the women come running out in every direction. When the house comes down to ashes and dust, the companions the next morning, they see Imam Sadiq is sitting outside his burnt house, he's crying. You think Imam Sadiq is crying for his house? Abadan la. Enta mu'min, enta shi'i, enta Ja'fari. When you hear of a house that is burning, your mind goes to Karbala. Allah. Imam Sadiq was remembering the burning of the tents on the eve of Ashura, and how his auntie Zainab and how his auntie Kulthum and Sakina and Sukaina came running out. Allahu Akbar. And this is what Imam Sadiq said when he was asked. He said, "Ya Imam, do you cry over a house that is materialistic?" He says, "No, I cry for my aunts in Sham Ghariba." Allahu Akbar. Burning tents, the narration mentions Muhammad ibn Muslim that I saw Zainab al-Kubra running into a burning tent, running out of a burning tent, into a burning tent, out of a burning tent. I said, is there something precious in the possessions that she has left behind? She is willing to get burnt in order to bring these possessions. Ikhwani, this is fire. He says, I went close and I see Zainab al-Kubra is pulling out Imam al-Sajjad. How many times, how many burns, first degree burns, third degree burns did Sayyidina Zainab get while pulling out Imam Sajjad? This is the tragedy and this is the dhulm on the people of Ilm and on the Ahlul Bayt. The narrations mention that the Mansur al-Dawaliki was not able to withstand the presence of Imam al-Sadiq. So they decided to feed him poisoned grapes. When the Imam ate these grapes and he succumbed to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he went into the house. One of the companions narrates, Imam al-Sadiq began to complain of extreme heat within his body. A few hours upon eating the grapes, Imam Sadiq says, I felt as if someone is cutting the interior of my stomach with a knife. Allah, Allah. For 3 days the Imam rested, or for 3 days the Imam was in his house, turning towards the right and turning towards the left due to the intensity of the poison. Imam al-Qadim said, there are times my father would faint due to the intensity of the pain, and there were times that he would be awake or conscious. Until the 25th of Shawwal, on a day like this, the final day of the life of Imam al-Sadiq, the narrations mention that Imam al-Sadiq gathered all his family members around him. He began to give them the wasiyah and he said to them, La yanalu shafa'ati mustakhifin as-salat. He says the final wasiyah of Imam al-Sadiq, he says to his family members that those who take salat to be lightly will not gain my shafa'ah. He then went on to bestow Imam al-Qadim as the next hujjah of Allah on the earth. He gave him the aqiq and he gave him the dhul fikar, he gave him the jami' and he gave him the Quran. One of the companions comes in and says, I saw Imam al-Sadiq on his final days. Because of the intensity of his poison, it is as if his skin had all melted away. He says, I saw my Imam, I'm translating the words, he says, I saw my Imam a head that looked like it's on a pile of bones because of the intensity of the poison. Ya Imam Sadiq, wa Sadiqa. The narrations mention that on this final day, Imam lay down on the floor and he asked to be made to face towards Qibla. He looked at Imam al-Qadim and gave him his final wasiyah. The narrations mentions فَمَدَّدَ يَدَيْهِ وَرِجْلَيْهِ وَغَمَّدَ عَيْنَيْهِ. Imam al-Sadiq straightened his hands and his legs. He closed his eyes. فَعَرَكَ جَبِينُهُ. The sweat of death began to pour down the forehead of Imam al-Sadiq. فَإِنْقَطَعَ نَفَسُهُ. Imam al-Sadiq stopped breathing. فَفَاضَتْ رُوحُهُ. Allah, the ruh of Imam al-Sadiq left the dunya. Imam al-Qadim and the Alawiyat begin to weep in the house. The narrations mention it is with great difficulty and with tears rolling down his cheeks. Imam al-Qadim gives Imam al-Sadiq a ghusl. He then wraps him in a coffin and he puts on his head the amama of Imam Zainul Abidin. Imam al-Qadim goes to Jannatul Baqi and buries his father. As he sat on the grave, he begins to weep for Imam al-Sadiq. I say, oh Imam, your tragedy is great, but come to Karbala. Allah, Allah. Imam al-Sadiq, when you were taking your final breath, you saw your entire family holding hands around you. But what about your grandfather, Imam al-Hussein? What did Imam al-Hussein see in his final moments? He's on the plains of Karbala. He sees Zainab al-Kubra on the till. He sees Kulthum. He sees Rubab holding back Sukaina. He sees Shimr with the khanjar coming towards him. Zainab shouting, Ya Adu Allah. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. ماتم Imam Sadiq, ماتم Imam Hussein.
عزادارو لقب جن کا ہے صادق اس کا ماتم ہے شہنشاہ دو عالم حضرت جعفر کا ماتم ہے عزادارو لقب جن کا ہے صادق اس کا ماتم ہے محمد مصطفیٰ کے دین کو جس نے کیا رائج ہوا وہ خلد کو راہ جہاں میں آج تلا تم ہے عزادارو لقب جن کا ہے صادق اس کا ماتم ہے جگر ٹکڑے کیا زہرے ہلاحل سے شہیدی کا نہ آیا خوف ظالم کو اندھیرا آج عالم ہے عزادارو لقب جن کا ہے صادق اس کا ماتم ہے کہاں سے چین ہو احمد علی حسن و زہرا کو چلے ہیں چھوڑ کر تربات نبی کے گھر میں ماتم ہے عزادارو لقب جن کا ہے صادق اس کا ماتم ہے عزیز و جعفر ہم عزیز و جعفر ہے ہم سروں کو کھول دو اپنے ہمارے رہنما کا دو جہاں میں آج ماتم ہے عزادارو لقب جن کا ہے صادق اس کا ماتم ہے کہاں سے چین ہو احمد علی حسن و زہرا کو چلے ہیں چھوڑ کر تربات نبی کے گھر میں ماتم ہے عزادارو لقب جن کا ہے صادق اس کا ماتم ہے شہنشاہ دو عالم حضرت جعفر کا ماتم ہے رحم اللہ من کا رسول المبارکۃ الفاتحہ بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم الحمد للہ رب العالمین إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير
Ahsan, thank you, Uncle Hussein. Before we conclude tonight, let's recite one more time Surah Fatiha for the Sada Sawab of Marhum Al-Hajj Firoz Merchant, and also for all those marhumeens and our families here and around the world. Surah Al-Mubarak Al-Fatiha. Let's also recite 5 times Dua Shifa for those that are sick in our families here and around the world. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amma yujibul mustarra iza da'ahu wa yakshifu su. 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 Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil faraja. We now conclude with Ziyarat Faisal. Bismillah.
السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا خديجة الكبرى. السلام عليك يا علي المرتضى. السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا حسن مجتبى. السلام عليك يا حسين الشهيد وابن الشهيد. السلام عليك يا علي زين العابدين. السلام عليك يا محمد باقر. السلام عليك يا جعفر الصادق. السلام عليك يا موسى الكاظم. السلام عليك يا علي الرضا. السلام عليك يا محمد تقي. السلام عليك يا علي النقي. السلام عليك يا حسن عسكري ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان. الأمان الأمان الأمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان. السلام عليك يا إمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان. عجل الله لك ما وعدك من الناس وظهور الأمر ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقاعدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرزك توعا وتمتيه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil faraja. That concludes tonight's program, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.